The old Victorian house on Maple Street stood silent, its windows dark like eyes that had seen too much. Ethan Carter, 25, stood frozen on the cracked sidewalk, staring at this sold sign stabbed into the front yard like a betrayal. His heart pounded as if it could shatter the truth. His family had sold his grandmother's house, the only place he'd ever felt safe while he was 3,000 miles away. All because he dared to come out as gay. Ethan's fingers tightened around the photograph in his hand. A faded Polaroid of his grandmother, Rose, smiling in her garden. She'd been gone 3 years. But this house was her legacy, her sanctuary, the place where she'd taught him to plant marigolds and whisper his fears to the stars. Now, it was gone, sold without a word to him, as if his love for another man had erased his right to her memory. Beside him, Liam Hayes, his boyfriend of 2 years, stood close, his blonde hair catching the last of the dying sunlight. At 26, Liam was steady, a former high school track star turned social worker, whose quiet strength had anchored Ethan through the chaos of coming out. "They can't take her from you," Liam said softly, his hand brushing Ethan's arm. "Not really." But the words felt hollow against the ache in Ethan's chest. His family, his parents. His older sister had just sold a house. They'd severed him from his roots, punishing him for who he was. The story of how Ethan ended up here, staring at a stranger's claim on his grandmother's house, began 6 months ago in San Francisco. He and Liam had built a life there. A small apartment filled with secondhand furniture and dreams of a future where they could be themselves. Ethan, a graphic designer with a knack for capturing emotion in his work, had finally found peace after years of hiding. Growing up in Willow Creek, a conservative town in rural Pennsylvania, he'd learned early to bury his truth. His parents, devout and unyielding, saw love as a sin unless it fit their narrow mold. His sister, Claire, 2 years older, had always been their golden child, quick to judge Ethan's rebellion. Only Rose, his grandmother, had seen him for who he was. Her love unconditional even when he couldn't yet name his feelings. Coming out had been a leap of faith. Ethan had flown back to Willow Creek last Christmas, heart racing, to tell his family. He'd sat at the dining table, the same one where Rose used to sneak him extra pie, and said the words, "I'm gay. I'm in love with Liam." The silence that followed was deafening. His mother's face crumpled. His father's turned to stone. And Claire had muttered, "You're choosing this over us." They hadn't screamed or fought, they didn't need to. Their rejection was a quiet blade, slicing through years of fragile bonds. By morning, Ethan was on a plane back to San Francisco, their voices echoing, "You've disappointed us. You've disappointed God." He hadn't known then that their rejection would escalate. A month later, Claire called. Her voice clipped. "We're selling Grandma's house. It's what's best." Ethan had begged, offered to buy it himself, but she'd hung up. He'd been working overtime, saving every penny, planning to return and fight for the house. But life in San Francisco was relentless. Rent was steep, and Liam's job at a youth shelter kept them both tethered to the city. By the time Ethan could afford the trip back, it was too late. The house was sold, the papers signed, his family's decision final. Now, standing in front of the house, Ethan felt the weight of that betrayal settle into his bones. The garden where Rose had taught him to tend roses was overgrown, the trellis sagging. The porch swing where they'd spent summer nights creaked in the breeze, a ghost of their laughter. "I should have come back sooner," Ethan whispered, his voice breaking. Liam pulled him closer, his warmth a small anchor in the storm. "You couldn't have known," he said. "But we're here now. We'll figure this out." Ethan wasn't so sure. The new owners, a young couple from out of state, "We're moving in tomorrow." He'd heard it from Mrs. Delaney, the nosy neighbor who'd called him in a panic. "Your parents didn't even tell me," she'd said. "I saw the sign go up yesterday." Ethan had booked the first flight out, Liam at his side, driven by a desperate need to see the house one last time. But standing here, he felt like a stranger in his own history. The town of Willow Creek hadn't changed much. Main Street still had the same diner, the same hardware store, the same church where Ethan's parents spent their Sundays. But the weight of the town's judgment felt heavier now. As Ethan and Liam walked hand in hand to the diner that evening, eyes followed them, some curious, some hostile. Ethan's high school friend, Mark, now a mechanic, waved cautiously from across the street, but didn't approach. The air was thick with unspoken words, and Ethan wondered if the town, like his family, had already written him off. At the diner, over greasy burgers and lukewarm coffee, Liam leaned forward, his green eyes steady. "What do you want to do, Ethan? We can fight this. There's got to be a way, legal, financial, something." Ethan stared at his plate, the food untouched. "It's not just the house," he said. "It's what it means. Grandma was the only one who loved me for me. Losing this feels like losing her all over again." Liam reached across the table, his hand covering Ethan's. "You haven't lost her. She's in your strength, her heart. And you've got me." The words were a lifeline, but Ethan's mind was spinning. Could he fight his family? Did he even want to? After they'd made it clear he was no longer theirs. The house was more than wood and brick, it was Rose's love, her stories, the safety he'd clung to as a confused kid. Losing it felt like losing himself. As they left the diner, the night air cool against their skin, Ethan made a decision. He wouldn't let this end here. Tomorrow, he'd confront his family, demand answers, and find a way to reclaim what was his. The house might be sold, but its meaning wasn't. And maybe, just maybe, he could show his family in this town that love, in all its forms, was worth fighting for. The next morning, Ethan woke to the sound of birds outside the motel window. Their chirps a cruel reminder of the mornings he'd spent with Rose in her garden. He lay still, Liam's steady breathing beside him, and stared at the ceiling, replaying the moment he'd seen this sold sign. Today, he'd face his family, his parents, Claire, the people who'd chosen money over memory, judgment over love. They drove to his parents' house, a modest ranch-style home on the edge of Willow Creek. The front yard was pristine, the grass clipped, the mailbox gleaming, a stark contrast to the neglect of Rose's garden. Ethan's stomach churned as he knocked on the door. Liam stood behind him, a silent pillar of support, his hand brushing Ethan's back as if to say, "You've got this." His mother, Ellen, answered, her face tightening at the sight of him. She was 55, her hair streaked with gray, her eyes carrying the same disapproval they had at Christmas. "Ethan," she said, her voice flat, "you didn't tell us you were coming." His father, Robert, appeared behind her, his broad shoulders filling the doorway. At 60, he was still imposing, his silence louder than words. "I didn't know I needed permission to see my family," Ethan said, his voice sharper than he intended. "Can we come in?" Ellen hesitated, glancing at Liam, but stepped aside. The living room was unchanged, same floral couch, same cross on the wall, same air of rigidity. Claire was there, sitting with a cup of tea, her expression unreadable. At 27, she looked older than Ethan remembered, her blonde hair pulled back tightly, her eyes avoiding his. "Why didn't you tell me?" Ethan asked, cutting to the chase. "You sold Grandma's house without even a phone call. That was my home, too." His voice cracked, and he hated it. hated the vulnerability in front of them. Robert folded his arms. It was our decision. The house was in Mom's name, not yours. We needed the money. Needed the money. Ethan's mind reeled. His parents weren't rich, but they weren't struggling. This was punishment. Plain and simple. It's because I'm gay, isn't it? Ethan's words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. Claire looked away, her fingers tightening around her mug. Ellen's lips pursed, but it was Robert who spoke. You made your choices. Ethan, we're trying to protect this family's reputation. This town talks. The words hit like a slap, confirming what Ethan had feared. His love for Liam wasn't just a sin to them, it was a stain. Liam, who'd been silent, stepped forward. With all due respect, sir, Ethan's not the one tearing this family apart. You are. His voice was calm but firm, his years as a social worker giving him a quiet authority. Robert's face reddened. But before he could respond, Claire spoke up. It's not that simple. Liam, you don't understand how things work here. People judge us. The church. Our friends, they all know. Know what? Ethan snapped. That I love someone. That I'm happy. Grandma would have been ashamed of you. The mention of Rose seemed to pierce the room. Ellen's eyes flickered with something guilt. Maybe, but she said nothing. Ethan pressed on. She loved me. She'd never have done this. Why can't you? The argument spiraled. Voices rising. Old wounds reopening. Ethan learned the sale had been Claire's idea, pushed through while he was off living his life in San Francisco. The money, they claimed, was for family expenses, but they dodged specifics. Ethan's anger grew, but so did his resolve. He wasn't just fighting for a house, was fighting for his place in this family, for the right to be seen. They left the house with no answers, only tension. As they drove back to the motel, Liam reached for Ethan's hand. You were incredible back there, he said. You stood up to them. Ethan managed a small smile, but his mind was on Rose. She'd always told him to fight for what mattered, to hold tight to love in all its forms. He wasn't done yet. That afternoon, Ethan and Liam visited Mrs. Delaney, the neighbor who'd tipped him off. Her house smelled of lavender and old books, and she greeted them with warm hugs and homemade cookies. I tried to stop them, she said, her voice trembling. Your grandmother would have wanted you to have that house. She shared what she knew. The buyers were a couple from New York, looking for a quiet retreat. The sale had been rushed, pushed through by a local realtor with ties to Ethan's father. There's something fishy about it, she said. Your parents didn't even try to get a fair price. The information lit a spark in Ethan. If the sale was shady, maybe there was a way to challenge it. He and Liam spent the evening researching property laws, calling lawyers, and digging into public records. By nightfall, they'd found a lead. The sale might have violated a clause in Rose's will, which stipulated that Ethan should have first refusal. It wasn't much, but it was hope. As they lay in bed that night, Ethan curled into Liam's arms, the weight of the day pressing down. What if I can't fix this? He whispered. Liam kissed his forehead. Then we'll build something new. Together. For the first time since arriving, Ethan felt a flicker of possibility. The fight wasn't over, and with Liam by his side, he was ready for whatever came next. The morning sun filtered through the motel's thin curtains, casting stripes across Ethan's face as he sat hunched over his laptop. He and Liam had barely slept. Their night spent scouring legal forums and drafting emails to attorneys. The lead about Rose's will felt like a lifeline, but it was fragile, tangled in legal jargon and the murky motives of his family. Ethan's phone buzzed with a text from Mrs. Delaney. Meet me at the library. Found something. They drove to the Willow Creek Public Library, a squat brick building where Ethan had spent countless afternoons as a kid. Lost in books, Rose recommended. Mrs. Delaney was waiting in the archive room, her silver hair pulled into a bun, a stack of papers in front of her. Your grandmother was meticulous, she said, sliding a folder across the table. She left a copy of her will with me, just in case. The will was a revelation. Rose had indeed included a clause giving Ethan first refusal on the house, a detail his parents had conveniently ignored. But there was more, a handwritten letter, tucked into the folder, addressed to Ethan. Her familiar loopy script brought tears to his eyes. My dearest Ethan, it began. This house is more than walls, it's our love. Our memories. Fight for it, if you must. But never forget that your heart is your true home. Ethan's throat tightened as he read, Liam's hand steady on his shoulder. Armed with the will, they contacted a local lawyer, Sarah Klein, who specialized in property disputes. Her office was a cluttered space above the hardware store, walls lined with legal books and photos of her kids. Sarah, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s, listened intently as Ethan explained the situation. This is a strong case, she said, tapping the will. But it won't be easy. Your family's already transferred the deed, and the buyers are innocent parties. We need to prove misconduct or fraud. The words were a gut punch. Ethan hadn't realized how far the sale had progressed. Liam, ever practical, asked, what's our next step? Sarah outlined a plan, file a motion to contest the sale, gather evidence of the rushed process, and request a hearing. It would cost money Ethan and Liam didn't have, but Sarah offered to work pro bono. Moved by Ethan's story, I've seen families do cruel things, she said, but I've also seen love win. Let's try. The rest of the day was a blur of action. Ethan and Liam visited the county clerk's office, pulling records of the sale. They found irregularities. The sale price was well below market value, and the realtor, a friend of Robert's, had expedited the process with questionable signatures. Ethan's anger flared. His family hadn't just betrayed him, they'd cheated Rose's memory for a quick buck. That evening, they returned to the house on Maple Street, unable to stay away. The new owner's moving truck was parked out front, and Ethan's heart sank as he saw boxes stacked on the porch. A woman in her 30s, with curly red hair and a friendly smile, approached them. Can I help you? She asked. Ethan hesitated, then told her the truth. This was his grandmother's house, sold without his consent. Her smile faded, replaced by sympathy. I'm so sorry, she said. We had no idea. The realtor said it was a clean sale. Her name was Rachel, and her husband, Tom, joined them, listening as Ethan poured out his story. They were kind, but firm. They'd bought the house in good faith, planning to start a family there. We'll talk to our lawyer, Rachel said. But we can't just undo this. Ethan nodded, his hope dimming. But Liam squeezed his hand. We're not giving up, he whispered. Back at the motel, Ethan's emotions churned: anger at his family, grief for Rose, fear of losing this fight. Liam sat beside him, scrolling through legal advice on his phone. We're in this together, he said. No matter what. Ethan leaned into him, drawing strength from his warmth. Rose's letter echoed in his mind. Your heart is your true home. Maybe the house was just a symbol, but it was one worth fighting for. By nightfall, they drafted a formal complaint with Sarah's guidance, citing the will and the suspicious sale. It was a long shot, but it was a start. As Ethan fell asleep, Liam's arms around him, he dreamed of Rose's garden, her voice whispering, fight, Ethan. Love always finds a way. The courthouse in Willow Creek was a gray stone building, its steps worn smooth by decades of footsteps. Ethan stood outside, his palms sweaty, as he and Liam prepared to meet Sarah for their first hearing. It had been a week since they'd filed the motion to contest the sale, and the reality of facing his family in court felt surreal, like stepping into a war he hadn't chosen. Inside, the courtroom was small, its wooden benches creaking under the weight of curious onlookers. Ethan's parents and Claire sat across the aisle, their faces a mask of defiance. Robert's jaw was set, Ellen's hands clasped tightly, and Claire avoided Ethan's gaze. The buyers, Rachel and Tom, were there too, looking uncomfortable but resolute. Sarah, in a crisp blazer, whispered to Ethan, "Stay calm. Let the facts speak." The judge, a stern woman in her 60s, listened as Sarah presented their case: the wills clause, the rushed sale, the suspiciously low price. Ethan's heart raced as she held up Rose's letter, her words a beacon in the sterile room. The opposing lawyer, hired by Ethan's parents, argued that the sale was legal, the wills clause non-binding, and Ethan had no claim. He wasn't even here, the lawyer said, his tone dismissive. He abandoned his family. The words stung, but Ethan held his ground, his eyes locked on Liam's for strength. When it was his turn to speak, he stood, his voice trembling but clear. "This isn't just about a house," he said. "It's about my grandmother, who loved me when no one else did. It's about punishing me for who I am. I deserve a chance to keep her memory alive." The room was silent, the judge's expression unreadable. The hearing ended inconclusively, with the judge ordering mediation before a final ruling. Ethan's family left without a word, their silence louder than any argument. Outside, Rachel approached Ethan, her eyes soft. "We're not your enemies," she said. "If there's a way to make this right, we'll try." It wasn't a promise, but it was something. Mediation was scheduled for the next day, and Ethan spent the evening preparing with Liam and Sarah. They strategized, digging deeper into the realtor's shady practices. Sarah found evidence of undisclosed conflicts of interest. Robert had promised the realtor a cut of the sale for future favors. It was enough to strengthen their case. But Ethan's hope was tempered by exhaustion. The fight was draining him, pulling him back into the pain of his family's rejection. The mediation session was tense, held in a cramped conference room. Ethan sat across from his parents and Claire, Liam's presence a quiet anchor. Sarah laid out their evidence, demanding the sale be voided or Ethan be compensated. Robert exploded, his voice booming. "You don't get to dictate this. Ethan, you walked away from us." Ellen stayed silent, her eyes on her hands, while Claire muttered, "This is embarrassing for everyone." Ethan's patience snapped. "You sold Grandma's house to hurt me," he said, his voice raw. "You couldn't accept me, so you took the one thing that mattered most. How is that love?" For the first time, Ellen's eyes met his, and he saw a flicker of doubt. Claire shifted uncomfortably, but Robert doubled down, refusing to negotiate. The mediator, a calm older man, suggested a compromise. Ethan could buy the house back at the sale price, with Rachel and Tom agreeing to step aside if reimbursed. It was a glimmer of hope, but Ethan's savings were nowhere near enough. As they left, Liam pulled him aside. "We'll find a way," he said. "Crowdfunding, loans, whatever it takes." Ethan nodded, but the weight of the fight pressed harder. That night, they sat on the motel bed, scrolling through crowdfunding platforms. Liam, ever optimistic, drafted a campaign, telling Ethan's story with raw honesty. "People will care," he said. "Your love for Rose, for this house site's universal." Ethan wasn't so sure, but he let Liam's hope carry him. By morning, The campaign was live, shared with friends, colleagues, and strangers across the internet. The first donation came from Mrs. Delaney $50, with a note for Rose. The crowdfunding campaign spread like wildfire. By the end of the first day, it had raised $2,000, with donations pouring in from San Francisco friends, Liam's co-workers, and even strangers moved by Ethan's story. Social media posts on X amplified their cause, with hashtags like Save Rose's House trending locally. Ethan read each message, his heart swelling at the support but aching at the silence from his family. He and Liam returned to the house daily, watching Rachel and Tom unpack, each box a reminder of time slipping away. Rachel invited them in one afternoon, offering coffee and a tour. The house felt different. New furniture, new paint, but Rose's spirit lingered in the creak of the floorboards, the slant of the attic stairs. "We love this place," Rachel said, her voice gentle. "But if you can buy it back, we'll work with you." Ethan nodded, grateful but overwhelmed. The sale price was $250. And even with the campaign's momentum, they were far from the goal. Sarah called with news. The realtor had admitted to cutting corners, hoping to avoid a lawsuit. It strengthened their case. But the judge still needed convincing. Ethan's parents, meanwhile, doubled down, refusing to acknowledge the will's clause. Claire reached out via text. Her message cold: "Stop this. Ethan, you're making it worse." He didn't respond, but the words cut deep. Liam suggested a community event to boost the campaign, and they organized a vigil at the house, inviting supporters to share stories of love and loss. The turnout was small but heartfelt. Mrs. Delaney, Mark from high school, and a few locals who'd known Rose. Ethan spoke, his voice steady despite the lump in his throat. "This house was my grandmother's heart," he said. "She taught me that love is worth fighting for. I'm fighting for her, and for everyone who's ever felt rejected for who they are." The vigil made the local news, drawing more donations and attention. A queer advocacy group in Pittsburgh offered legal support, and a wealthy donor from San Francisco pledged $50. Ethan's hope grew, but so did the pressure. His parents caught wind of the campaign and sent a cease and desist letter, claiming defamation. Sarah laughed it off. "They're scared," she said, but Ethan felt the walls closing in. One night, unable to sleep, Ethan slipped out to the house alone. He sat on the porch swing, the same one where Rose had told him stories of her youth. The stars were bright, and he whispered to them, as she'd taught him. "I'm trying, Grandma," he said. "I just don't know if I'm enough." A rustling nearby startled him. It was Claire, standing in the shadows. "I didn't expect you here," she said, her voice softer than before. They talked for the first time in months, not as enemies, but as siblings. Claire admitted she'd pushed the sale, thinking it would fix the family's shame. "I was wrong," she said, tears in her eyes. "I didn't know how much the house meant to you." Ethan wanted to forgive her, but the hurt was too raw. "Then help me," he said. "Talk to Mom and Dad. Make this right." Claire nodded, but her silence as she left Ethan uncertain. The next day, the campaign hit $100. A milestone that felt miraculous. Liam celebrated by cooking Ethan's favorite meal, spaghetti with homemade sauce, in their motel room's tiny kitchenette. "We're halfway there," he said, his eyes bright. Ethan smiled, but his mind was on Claire. Could she sway their parents? Or was this fight destined to tear them further apart? Claire's change of heart was fragile, but it was a start. She met Ethan and Liam at the diner, her eyes red from lack of sleep. "I talked to Mom and Dad," she said. "They're stubborn, But Mom's starting to crack. She misses you, Ethan, even if she won't say it. Ethan's heart twisted, hope and pain tangled together. He wanted to believe her, but trust was a casualty of this war. Sarah called with urgent news. The judge had scheduled a final hearing in 3 days. The evidence of the realtor's misconduct, combined with Rose's will, gave them a fighting chance. But they needed more. Ethan and Liam dove back into research, uncovering emails between Robert and the realtor that hinted at a backroom deal. It wasn't a smoking gun, but it was close. The campaign continued to grow, hitting $150,000 with donations from across the country. Ethan posted updates on X, thanking supporters and sharing Rose's letter. The response was overwhelming, stories of others who'd faced rejection for their identity, who saw Ethan's fight as their own. A local LGBTQ group organized a rally outside the courthouse, planning to show up at the hearing with signs and support. Ethan was humbled, but the weight of their expectations pressed on him. What if he failed? He and Liam spent an evening with Rachel and Tom, discussing options. The couple agreed to sell the house back if Ethan could match the price by the hearing. It was a generous offer, but the timeline was brutal. Ethan's savings, combined with the campaign, still fell short. Liam suggested selling their car, a beat-up sedan they'd driven cross-country. It's just a thing, he said. The house is your heart. Ethan agreed, but the sacrifice stung. The night before the hearing, Ethan's mother called. Her voice was shaky, a far cry from her usual composure. I didn't want this to go so far, she said. I don't understand your life, Ethan. He took a deep breath, channeling Rose's strength. You don't have to understand, Mom. You just have to love me. She didn't respond, but the line stayed open, her silence a small crack in the wall between them. The rally outside the courthouse was a sea of color rainbow flags, handwritten signs, and voices chanting Ethan's name. Inside, the hearing was a battle. Sarah presented their evidence, painting a picture of betrayal and greed. The opposing lawyer fought back, claiming Ethan's absence gave him no rights. Ethan took the stand, his voice steady as he spoke of Rose, of love, of the home that shaped him. Liam's proud smile from the gallery gave him courage. The judge deliberated for an agonizing hour. When she returned, her ruling was a compromise. The sale stood. But Ethan had 60 days to buy the house back at the original price, with his family ordered to cover legal fees for their misconduct. It wasn't a full victory, but it was a chance. Ethan's family left without speaking, but Claire lingered, her eyes meeting his for a moment before she turned away. Outside, the crowd cheered, and Liam pulled Ethan into a hug. We did it, he whispered. But Ethan knew the real fight was just beginning. 60 days to raise $100. 000 was a mountain, and his family's silence loomed large. Still, with Liam by his side and Rose's letter in his pocket, he felt ready to climb. The 60-day clock was ticking, and Ethan threw himself into the fight. The crowdfunding campaign became his lifeline, with daily updates and heartfelt videos that kept the momentum alive. Liam took on extra shifts at the shelter, while Ethan freelanced late into the night, designing logos and websites to scrape together every dollar. Their tiny motel room became a command center, littered with coffee cups and legal notes. Support poured in from unexpected places. Mark, Ethan's high school friend, organized a car wash fundraiser, drawing a crowd of old classmates who'd once shunned him. Mrs. Delaney rallied her book club, and even the diner's owner donated a day's profits. The campaign hit $200. 000. Tantalizingly close to the goal. But time was ruthless, and doubts crept in. What if they fell short? What if the house slipped away again? Ethan's mother called again, this time with Claire on the line. "We want to help," Ellen said, her voice hesitant. Claire chimed in. "I found a buyer for some of Dad's old equipment. It's not much, but it's $10. 000. Ethan was stunned. It wasn't an apology, but it was a step. He thanked them, his voice thick, and hung up, overwhelmed. Liam, sensing his turmoil, pulled him close. "They're trying," he said. "That's something." The community rallied harder. The LGBTQ group hosted an art auction, with Ethan donating a series of designs inspired by Rose's garden. The event was a success, pushing the campaign to $230. 000. But with only a week left, the gap felt insurmountable. Ethan visited the house one last time, sitting in the garden where weeds now choked the roses. He traced the petals, remembering Rose's hands guiding his. "I'm so close, Grandma," he whispered. "Don't let me fail." Rachel and Tom, moved by Ethan's determination, offered a final gesture. They'd lower the price by $10. 000, citing their own savings from the rushed sale. It was a gift, but it still left $10. 000 to raise. In a last-ditch effort, Ethan and Liam posted a final plea on X, sharing Rose's letter and a photo of the house. The post went viral, catching the eye of a national news outlet. A reporter interviewed Ethan, and the story aired, drawing donations from across the country. On the final day, the campaign hit $245. 000. Ethan and Liam raced to the bank, wiring the funds to Rachel and Tom's account. Sarah finalized the paperwork, and by evening, the house was Ethan's. He stood on the porch, keys in hand, tears streaming down his face. Liam wrapped his arms around him, whispering, "You did it. We did it." The victory was bittersweet. Ethan's family hadn't fully reconciled, but Claire's help and Ellen's calls were a start. The house was more than a building, it was a symbol of love's resilience, of Rose's legacy, of Ethan's right to exist as he was. As he and Liam stepped inside, the familiar creak of the floorboards felt like a homecoming. The first night in the house was quiet, the kind of quiet that held 1,000 memories. Ethan and Liam sat on the porch swing, the stars above Maple Street bright and endless. The house was theirs, but it was empty, stripped of Rose's furniture, her warmth. Yet Ethan felt her presence in every corner, her love woven into the walls. They spent weeks restoring the house, painting walls, planting roses, and filling it with their own story. Friends from San Francisco visited, helping sand floors and hang curtains. Mrs. Delaney brought cuttings from her garden, a gift to honor Rose. The community, once wary, began to soften. Mark stopped by with tools, and even the diner's owner offered a free meal. Willow Creek was changing, slowly, its heart opening to Ethan's truth. Claire visited one afternoon. Alone, she stood in the garden, her hands in her pockets, and apologized. "I was wrong," she said. "I thought I was protecting us, but I hurt you." Ethan hugged her, the first real connection they'd had in years. His parents were slower to come around, but Ellen sent a letter. Her words clumsy but sincere. "I'm trying to understand. Ethan, I love you." It wasn't perfect, but it was enough for now. The house became a haven, not just for Ethan and Liam, but for others. They hosted a support group for local queer youth, turning the living room into a space of laughter and healing. Ethan framed Rose's letter, hanging it above the fireplace, a reminder of her wisdom. Your heart is your true home. He and Liam planned their future, their wedding in the garden, a life built on love. One evening, as they tended the roses, Ethan looked at Liam, his partner, his rock. We made it, he said, his voice steady. Liam smiled, his eyes reflecting the sunset. We did. And we'll keep making it. Every day. The house stood behind them, a testament to their fight, their love, and the unbreakable bond of family, not the one Ethan was born into, but the one he'd chosen. The story of the house on Maple Street wasn't just about reclaiming a building. It was about reclaiming identity, about proving that love could triumph over rejection. Ethan had lost his family's approval, but he'd gained something greater, a home, a community, and a future where he could be himself, unapologetically. As the stars blinked above, he knew Rose was watching, her smile as bright as ever, proud of the man he'd become.